Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining this FDEA Market Insights webinar. This morning, I'm delighted to be joined by Diane from Global Strategies and Tools. Global Strategies and Tools are FDA's in-market partner for the Latin American region. And today, Diane's going to be talking specifically on opportunities in Colombia and Mexico. So this webinar is being recorded. We'll send around the slides afterwards. And we'll also send a link to the webinar recording so you can share it with your team, etc. So I'm going to hand over to Diane now. If you do have any questions, then please just pop them in the chat box as we go along, and we'll come back to them after Diane's done her presentation. Over to you, Diane.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. My name is Diane, as Mel mentioned. I work with Global Strategies and Tools, and maybe I'll share a little bit about myself before we get started. I've been in the industry for about 4 years now, working with companies that are looking to go into the Latin American market. And this webinar is special to me because I come from Colombian and Mexican background, so it's nice to be able to present this. So we can just get straight into it. I did see that there's some people from the last webinar that we did that was also in Latin America. We had a focus in Colombia and Mexico plus other markets. Today we'll be also covering Colombia and Mexico, but we will go into more details and kind of cover different topics. So we'll start with Colombia, and we're going to go into the economic growth in 2025, what it's looking like, what it's how it's related to the food and beverage sector. We'll also be going into the key segments within the sector and consumption growth opportunities for UK companies. And to start, we'll go into the projected GDP growth. The estimates suggest that Colombia's GDP will be growing between 2.7 and 3.2 in 2025, and this ends up being around 9 billion increase, and that will end up being a 333 billion GDP. And specifically for food and beverage, that means that the sector has been growing, and it's going to be continue growing into 4.5% with an annual growth rate. And it takes up a pretty significant part of the overall GDP of Colombia. It's not the first, but it is within the top 5. And for example, it takes up 3% of Colombia's GDP, which is about 10 billion. So that's pretty big considering that the first one is oil and gas, and other than that, it's one of the most significant ones in Colombia. And one of the segments within the food and drink sector is food processing, which is almost 60% of the sector. And this includes coffee, which is a huge market in Colombia, a huge local production, as well as exports for the country. There's also dairy and flour. And what's most commonly imported for food processing includes unrefined oils, and this includes soybean, sunflower, and other types of oils. And this is mostly for the industrial demand. In terms of dairy products, milk products, whey, these are usually used for confectionery and for the production of certain types of beverages. In terms of glucose and sweeteners, this is another very commonly imported product for this sector. It's used, of course, as a sweetener or texture enhancer. So this is very commonly used for the beverage industry and also the sweets. And for flavoring and additives, there are some flavors that are not easily found in Colombia. So in turn, they're actually imported from international markets. And in terms of grains and cereals, it's not there's not enough production locally, so this is complemented by these imports. For example, corn and wheat are two that are very significant quantities, and it's also used for different applications, such as feeding the local stock in Colombia. And another segment that we'll get into is the beverage and the liquors. This contributes to 18% with a strong presence of local and, of course, international brands that are well known throughout the world. It is a very, very competitive market, but there is a growing space, which we'll get into shortly. First, we'll go into the national brands. There's a very common drink that either you love it or you hate it, which is Ponimalta. It's a malt drink that a lot of Colombians are used to drinking from very young age, and it's actually one of the second most chosen brand in Colombia, which is funny for people that are not from there because it's a very acquired taste, I would say. Then we have, of course, the coffee brand Sello Rojo. This is a brand that is very commonly used in Colombia. It's more of the basic brand that a lot of families are used to using. There's Postobon. Postobon can be compared to your typical soda brand that has a bunch of flavors, fruit flavors like apple, orange. This is a very commonly used beverage in restaurants, and whenever people are having lunch or dinner, it's common to find them drinking Postobon. And then we have two very commonly used beer brands that are fundamental. There's Club Colombia Águila, and those are the two most commonly chosen ones through consumers. And in terms of international brands, you really do see those brands that you see in all of the countries, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Red Bull, Gatorade, Monster. These are very commonly found also. Coca-Cola has a very strong presence in Colombia specifically. And in terms of Red Bull and Gatorade, this is a growing beverage that has gained some weight in Colombia. Sorry, Red Bull and Monster. Gatorade is also one that has been growing in, more for the sports side and also the health benefits that it's kind of been marketed as, of course, a drink that has electrolytes. So as this trend is coming into Colombia where consumers are looking for healthier options, they might choose Gatorade. And going into those trends, I did briefly mention it, but functional and health-oriented beverages is something that is growing. So these are more of those drinks that have the vitamins and the antioxidants and other functional ingredients that are growing kind of in an international sense, but also in Colombia, it's being well adapted. There's also ready-to-drink tea and coffee, which is it's pretty new to the Colombian market. It is growing and it's looking to grow substantially into 2020, 2033. There's also a lot of non-alcoholic and low alcohol options that are growing in the market because there's this movement of being able to drink without having to consume a lot of alcohol. And there are not many options for these three trends currently in the market. There are existing brands, but I would say that these are kind of these standout opportunities for companies that are looking to go into the market in these specific sectors. Is niche, it would be interesting to explore since there is space in the market to be able to do so as it is growing and not as established. And in terms of soft drinks, this is, of course, one that it's very traditional and it does have very strong competition, meaning that uh, it requires more effort to be able to gain weight into the market, but it does also have some opportunity in the sense of there's this shift towards low sugar and flavored water options. Even Postobon, for example, has this flavored water where they use the same type of syrup that they use for their traditional sodas, but they use it as a flavored water option where it's more of a less sugar, healthier option for consumers that are looking to still have a little bit of a punch into their beverage. And the last segment that we'll get into are the supermarkets and self-service stores. This is a huge distribution channel in Colombia where neighborhood stores and mini markets account for 40%, making them extremely important to the local market. And what we saw in the trends when we're looking into the information was that there are 500,000 stores in Colombia, and these are these little mini markets that you can find around the corner. And they've been around for many years. And this is the typical place where you need something very quickly. You go down there and you buy some. You can also do your somewhat of a purchase of your groceries there. So this is a great option. And there's also something that has been growing very, very rapidly in Colombia, which is the hard discounters. And this is chains like D1, Ara, Justo, where in the last 2 years they've grown 20%, which has very much affected the traditional supermarkets. And what hard discounters are in Colombia is it's more of a supermarket that provides options that you might not be used to, brands that you might not be used to, or different types of flavors or new products at a very affordable price. So aside from having affordable prices in general of the traditional items such as eggs, flour, and all of those basics, they also provide these kind of variety options where people can buy very new products or new to them products, and it's growing a lot in popularity recently in Colombia. And in terms of the Oreca's channel, it does take up 15% of total food and beverage consumption. And in 2008, it grew 8% due to the tourism. This is a rebound effect of tourism, very high tourism in Colombia from the previous pandemic. And the most commonly purchased products that we found we looked into what are people buying at these stores, at these mini markets, at the discounters. And we saw that beverages, of course, is a top selling product. Also, the staple foods, of course, the rice, the cooking oils, and sales of cooking oil, for example, has increased 33% when you compare it to the previous years. As for packaged goods, you have canned tuna, which is very, very common in Colombia. It's one of the proteins that people like to get as it's a cheap option and it's also an easy option for cooking. There's also an increase in snacks. And for example, the hard discounters are great places where a lot of the Colombian consumers buy these snacks. And we saw that there was a 30% increase in sales for this specific item. In terms of juices and nectars, and it's also been growing around the same percentage of 34% in sales. And for example, corn flour, which is something that is extremely important in the Colombian diet, which are the arepas. If you might not know, it's just a sort of corn little patty that is made basically with at least once a day for people. It's included in their meals. So of course, corn flour is very important to the Colombian diet, and dairy products as well, such as milk, cheese, and yogurts, which are very, very commonly used in dishes. And as I mentioned, the arepas, there's also the ones that they sell already prepackaged. So that is also a very commonly purchased product. And when we look at the changes in consumption and where there's certain opportunities for UK exporters, we saw that the processed food consumption is expected to continue growing 5% in 2025. And it's actually outpacing the GDP growth. So that seems like it could be an interesting avenue for entry. Also, as I mentioned before, the healthy and sustainable foods is driving demand for imported products. And this includes many items, but for example, plant-based proteins, organic snacks, functional beverages. We saw that healthy food and organic foods are increasing by 12%, have increased by 12% in 2024, and it's projected to continue growing this. Functional foods, as we've discussed already, those beverages that have a strong marketing emphasis on the utility behind it and the health benefits behind it. And there's also a space for premium and gourmet snacks, which I think is great, a great opportunity, as there's many options from the UK that could enter through this avenue. In 2024, there was an increase of 10% of this specific segment. So we do see a growing interest in these high value products. And it's also great to see this data and see that this is developing, because Colombia is a price sensitive market. And it has been a challenge in the past for companies to enter a market, as people would go for the basic materials that they need and maybe not spend so much on these premium gourmet snacks, which now we're seeing that is growing, and it provides a great opportunity to be able to penetrate the market. And of course, the premium alcoholic beverage market is also growing. This is a trend that is very much tied with experiences in nice cocktail bars, and also trying to incorporate that into personal life. So this market specifically grew 15% in 2024, which it also represents a great opportunity for British companies that are looking to go into the market. And in terms of politics and trade agreements, Colombia is a country that has been going through some political changes now. It's been many years with this new president, but there has been a lot of discussions between very strong political changes in terms of what's relevant to the UK or what's relevant to companies from the UK. There's still the trade agreement that has been in place since 2019, which does facilitate the trade between the UK and Colombia, and it does allow for healthy competition, transparency, and intellectual property rights. In terms of the regulatory developments, this is something that has happened in Colombia that can affect the companies from UK, which is a tax reform on certain food products. This is a tax that was implemented in 2022, and this applies to sugar sweetened beverages and ultra processed foods. This does have the intention of making the consumer aware that this product maybe might have more trans fat or more sugar, but in turn, this makes that companies, they have to put certain labels, which we'll get into, on the packaging. So this updated regulation requires companies to comply with these standards and put some sort of a signal on the product if it does exceed X, Y, and Z. So this is something that must be taken into consideration when importing and trying to incorporate these sort of products into the market. In terms of the investment made into Colombia, this has also been kind of going down the same line. It's looking to renegotiate the bilateral investment treaty with the UK and Colombia, but in terms of the growing demand and opportunities that still can persist through this, Colombia is a company that continues importing many food ingredients, as domestic demand is constantly requiring or requesting more high quality items or healthier options, as this is a trend that's kind of on the international level, but also well incorporated into the Colombian market. So this does present an opportunity for companies in the UK that participate in these sort of segments and are looking to enter the market. And I did want to touch a little, just very quickly, on inflation in Colombia, as it is something very important that is happening in Colombia. There has been an increased inflation in 2025, which is between 3.5 and 4%. And in 2024, it was recorded at 5.2, which is higher than the general index for specifically the food items. For example, we are comparing the prices between essential food items, and rice, for example, increased 22%. Beef increased 16%, eggs increased 25%, bread also increased that much, and sugar itself increased 40%. So it does show that food inflation is is present in Colombia, and it is causing a challenge, as many Colombians already spend a lot of their budget on food and beverages. We found that on average, almost 30% of their budget is spent on food and beverages. So, these factors of inflation, they affect how much the consumers are willing to purchase or able to purchase or spend on these more luxury goods. And what we also found was that this in turn affects the commercial relationships that a company might have with a direct distribution channel like a store or a distributor partner. These relationships are affected by the inflation, as companies are maybe a little more cautious in the terms of building these relationships or incorporating new products or committing to some sort of commercial agreement. So we do see that it not only affects the consumers and their consumer behavior and their purchasing patterns, but it also does affect the commercial relationships that may come out of these conversations with local partners and local distribution channels. And now we'll get into Mexico. For Mexico, we'll be looking at the investment and growth of the food and beverage sector. We'll be looking also at the economic growth and the relation to the sector, which is food and beverage, and also the consumption growth and opportunities for UK exporters. In terms of the GDP growth for Mexico, there is a deceleration projected for 2025 with 1.4%, which is down from 2.4% in 2024. There is a continued budget deficit, and it is almost 4% of GDP for the upcoming year. This does show that there is a projected economic slowdown, and external trade tensions we'll get into the trade tensions through the side of the US, because it does affect very closely the international relationships that Mexican companies and the Mexican market has in general. Since the US imposed a 25% tariff on Mexican imports, it affects kind of the market as a whole. This affects the risk of recession for Mexico, and this does it is represented through that budget deficit, the decline in GDP that is projected for 2025. And this also affects the consumer prices, which, since the tariffs are expected to increase the prices of Mexican imports, including fruits, vegetables, and beverages, they are impacting the consumer prices in Mexico and the US. This, depending on how you see it, may be an opportunity or a challenge, which we'll also get into this further down the line. In terms of the food and drink sector specifics, for example, the avocado prices they have gotten very high since this is a very staple export from Mexico. There are projections that are concerned with the price being very high in the near future, and the investment initiatives. For example, Nestlé is a company that has made very big investments in Mexico's food sector, which can be maybe a good sign, as a big company like Nestlé still believes in the opportunity in the market and continues to put towards a 1 billion investment over the next 3 years to boost local production. It shows that the market is not stopping, and it shows that there's still opportunity to be taken advantage of. And in terms of the economic growth in 2025 and this specific sector, in 2022, Mexico and the UK reached approximately 5 billion in total trade, which 8% of that was actually for the food and beverage sector. And what was the most potential in Mexico was alcoholic beverages. So Scottish whiskey and other distilled spirits were very commonly found as, a lot of market potential. There's also gourmet and organic products, which, similar to Colombia, there's a growing trend. I would say it's probably more prevalent or more well established in Mexico than it is in Colombia at this very moment. But there is this rising trend of the consumption of premium and healthy options for consumers, where I think British companies can be very competitive in. And consumer trends currently in Mexico include organic products, which is consistently growing. Currently is at an annual growth rate of 12%. And this is very much due to the increased awareness of health and environmental concerns. There's also the healthy snack trend, which is growing 15%, and the premium alcoholic beverages, which is growing 10%. So companies that do participate in these specific sectors, specific niches, can find opportunities in a growing market. And for example, when we look at the price difference between the items, whiskey can be 25 in Mexico and 22 in United Kingdom per bottle. As for beer, it's around the same also. It's three in Mexico and 250 in UK. So the prices don't vary that much, which is something to be considerate of when going into the market, as this needs to be adapted to the local market, of course, if looking to be able to participate in a strategic way. And we also looked into what are the most commonly purchased products in Mexico, and we found that tortillas, corn flour is also very much a staple in Mexican cuisine. There are a lot of companies that dominate this segment, which participate both locally and internationally. There's also dairy products, which is milk, cheese, yogurt, the traditional dairy products, which might be found, um, is also commonly purchased in the markets. So there are very well established brands in this segment as well. And the meat processing is also something that is very commonly purchased, which includes beef, pork, poultry. In Mexico, there is a large consumption of meats, specifically beef, pork, also poultry. So they do consume a lot of meat in Mexico, and it's very prevalent in their diet. In terms of beverages, there's alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages, which alcoholic includes, of course, the traditional tequila, mezcal. There's also the non-alcoholic beverages, which Coca-Cola is very present in Mexico, as they are one of the largest bottlers of Coca-Cola products by volume, and exclusively in Mexico and Latin American countries. So you can imagine that they have a very strong hold on the market. In terms of the retail and distribution for this sector, supermarkets and hypermarkets are very much prevalent also in Mexico. There's a very strong retail chain, for example, in Mexico, which has different types of formats. They have just a normal supermarket. They also have a more premium store. So this same distribution channel, the same supermarket, can have different formats of presenting their items, or kind of tending to different segments of the market. And there's also the convenience stores, which are very much present in Mexico. This is something that exists in Mexico and maybe not so much in other countries in Latin America, where chains have a range of food and beverages items where you can kind of go for convenience, of course, to purchase these items. And what is most commonly purchased in Mexico includes soft drinks, very present in Mexico. And we found that on average, the consumption per person is around 160 liters annually. And even young children consume these beverages. Speaking from personal experience, and this, I can confirm that this is definitely true. And beer is also something that is very commonly purchased in Mexico, with the typical brands including Corona, Modelo. These are two brands that are very prevalent, as well as the other local brands and international brands that have been working their way into the market. Of course, the tequila mezcal is a traditional alcoholic beverage that is deeply rooted into the culture and into the social practices that forms part of the weekly, monthly family gathering routine. And there's also aguas frescas. These are drinks that are usually found at restaurants as an alternative to the soft drinks. They are usually made in-house, and it's sort of a fruit beverage with seeds or water or cereal based, and it's commonly consumed throughout the country. And there's many variations of these beverages. And there's, of course, also coffee, which is very commonly purchased beverage. And there's a traditional drink called de olla, which is a sort of coffee that is very prevalent in Mexico, that does contain cinnamon and raw sugar. It's a specific coffee to Mexico and very commonly used. In terms of more food items, the staple foods in Mexico do include corn. It's used in many different ways. There's a lot of traditional dishes that do use corn, either through the actual corn or as a flour. Um, it does remain about 60% of the country's cropland, but corn continues. The consumption is so high that it continues to be something that is very commonly imported in Mexico, as well as very commonly grown. So that can just show how much of a significance it does have in the market. Beans are also a fundamental item in the diet of the Mexican population. It's a source of protein that has been used for many, many years and deeply incorporated into the traditional dishes, as well as chili peppers and tomatoes. These are very commonly found in dishes, as well as avocados, as Mexico is the world's largest producer of avocados. Many avocados are exported, but they're also very essential to the diet of the Mexican people. And in terms of the policies and trade agreements for Mexico, there was also a change um, in the presidency in Mexico very recently, and this has affected the market, of course, and it's affected the commercial environment that is happening in Mexico. But first, we'll begin with the agreement that was placed following Brexit. This was in 2020. And it came into place in 2021, and it does maintain the preferential trade agreements that Mexico and the European Union had. So it does provide those benefits to the UK companies even through Brexit and after Brexit. The benefits for the food and beverage sector is that there's that security that the food and beverage products that enter the market will enter with reduced or zero tariffs. And this does, of course, help competitiveness. And it also does provide that stable legal background for trade operations, which is very important for companies. And what is going on now is, if since May 22, Mexico and the UK did negotiate for a new free trade agreement, which was put into place or began to be discussed because they were looking to reduce the tariffs and reduce any non-tariff barriers, specifically in the food and drinks sector, as the food and drink sector is a very important sector for Mexico. So it did come into the conversation, and it is important as they're trying to seek making the exportation of foods and beverages and services more efficient. So this is looking to provide that benefit to the UK companies that are looking to enter. And since 2025, the 1st of January, Mexico did implement a new requirement for documentation on all imported shipments. And this does involve very specific details, such as the Mexican tax identifier information and all of the details of the recipient, as well as the specific item descriptions for each order. And this is something that you need to ensure that is complied with, as it will not be able to enter past the border, and it may cause some delays if not properly prepared. There's also food and safety standards compliance that has been in place for time now, which is the regulations that govern the food safety labeling quality standards. Mexico is another market that also has these labels on the products that are ultra processed or high in sugars. It's very similar to the same signal that is put on the Colombian products, but it does have a different shape. So the concept is basically the same, where on the packaging it must show that this item has a high sugar content or high trans fat. So that concept is the same, but the icon is a little different between the two. They're different shapes. And in terms of the opportunities through all of this, Mexico continues expanding the middle class, and there is an increased urbanization, which has, of course, increased the demand of different food and beverage options. The food scene in terms of restaurants And that has been growing very exponentially in Mexico, where now you can find very high-end or special, more premium restaurants in places where perhaps there wasn't before. And this in turn also provides those opportunities for UK companies either looking to go into that sector, looking to go into the distribution channels that we mentioned before, such as the supermarkets, which also continue being an opportunity. And it seems like we finished a little early, so I am happy to answer any questions that may have arisen through the presentation. And I want to thank Mel again for this space. It's great to be able to share the information about Colombia and Mexico. We're always here to help, of course. So I'm open to answering any questions if there are any.
Oh, thanks, Diane. That was brilliant. I think yeah, really good to have an insightful look at both of those markets, and interesting to hear how the US might be affecting Mexico going forward with the tariffs. Hopefully that won't be a long-term policy, but we will see. So yeah, just opening up the questions then. Please just do pop your microphone off mute if you have a question for Diane while she's on.
Oh, Mel, we can also mention the opportunity of meeting with the companies.
Yeah. Yep. So so we've got an ongoing program with Diane and her team over the coming years. So we do already have in the schedule a couple of other webinars, which I have already seen that people are signing up to. So on the 12th of June, we've got a focus on Chile and Peru. And then on the 16th of September, Panama and Ecuador. So do make sure that you sign up to those if they're markets of interest, or just to learn more about those markets if you're not aware of export legislation and that kind of thing. But yes, Diane has very kindly offered for members to be able to join in a one-to-one business clinic meeting with them to talk about Latin American opportunities for your products. So if you do want to get in touch, I will send around the recording and details of how to connect with Diane to set that up. Just having a quick look in the chat box. We do have a question here. We had an exhibitor at ISM received real interest from Falabella for a Christmas gift range. What can you tell us about them? I probably pronounced that wrong.
No worries, I understood. Falabella is a store that is very prominent in Colombia. It's a very well-known chain. I actually always love going when I go back to Colombia. And it's actually a department store that was started in Chile, it did move into Colombia, and it's very present in Colombia market. They have a lot of their own brands, but they also do offer other brands inside these department stores. As so whatever you can imagine it as a traditional department store that has different sort of sections with shoes, with clothing and other items. So it's great that there's interest from them because it is a very difficult contact to get. I can promise you that. So that is wonderful to hear.
Yeah, great. And yeah, you did mention in Colombia tends to be more sort of the corner shops. Are they sort of dealt with by individual do you contact them directly, or how does that work? Is it regional or national?
Yeah. So usually distributors in Colombia and in Mexico, they'll tackle certain regions. They won't do only the bigger ones do national distribution. But usually the most common one is sort of regions where they tackle certain cities or certain provinces, if you should say it that way. And what they do is that they work with these little shops to help them get the products that they need because they obviously can't purchase a huge quantity since they're so small, but they do help with that. And we have found that there are some big ones, but the big ones maybe don't have access to the small little mini markets that do exist. They kind of go for the bigger ones that are present in local cities.
Okay. And are there like the hypermarkets in Colombia like there are in Mexico, or does it tend to be sort of more dominated by the smaller shops?
Yeah, there's the bigger supermarkets also in both countries. There's there's the same sort of mix in the both countries, with the only difference in Mexico that they have the convenience stores. In
Mm,
Colombia, you don't really see any of that. You see more of just the mini markets, which kind of serves the same purpose, where you can stop and get something very quickly. But I would say, as someone that spent a lot of time in all three of these countries, um, as in, sorry, not three countries, Mexico, Colombia, and also in Los Angeles. But I understand the concept of the convenience store and the mini market, and I do see that they have very different feelings, but they do serve the same purpose, where whenever you need something very quickly, or just a quick beverage, a quick snack, you can stop by and get something. But I would say that that would be the most significant difference between Colombian and Mexican market with these distribution channels.
thank you. Anybody else, any more questions? Please do feel free to speak up. Think we've answered them all. So yes, so I will send around information about how to connect with Diane and her team for the one-to-one business clinics. I think that's a great opportunity, and definitely take up her offer if you want to learn more about, where your products might be doing particularly well in South America. And yeah, definitely sign up to the other two webinars, which I'll also include links for, which are live on our membership portal already, so in June and September. But thank you again for your time this morning, Diane.
No,
Really
thank you,
great
Mel.
to have you in there.
It was a
Okay.
pleasure. It was a pleasure to present Colombia, Mexico. We did do a presentation not too long ago, so I didn't want to go into the more general details, but the next webinars we will be covering what we covered today, as well as more of those details to get that general context of the market. So it'll be great to see a lot of these faces again in these next markets.
Thanks very much. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. I'm going to end it here, and I will be in touch with all the details to follow up. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.
Bye, thank you.